Silence can be louder than 1,000 words, especially when someone is used to having access to your attention. The moment your constant messages stop, your instant replies disappear, and your energy is no longer freely available, a psychological shift can begin. But here is where most people misunderstand the power of silence. Ignoring a woman does not automatically make her miss you, chase you, or suddenly become attracted to you. Sometimes it creates curiosity, sometimes it creates emotional tension, and sometimes it simply tells her that you are no longer interested. The difference is hidden in the psychology behind your silence. When a familiar pattern suddenly changes, the mind naturally searches for an explanation. Why did his behavior change? Did something happen? Is he pulling away? Did I misread his interest? That uncertainty can make a person think more deeply about a situation, especially when there was already emotional interest or unfinished tension. And this is where silence becomes far more powerful than people realize. The real question is not how to ignore a woman so she chases you. The real question is what happens inside the human mind when attention disappears. In this video, we are going to uncover the psychology of absence, why sudden changes in attention can create curiosity, how uncertainty affects romantic thinking, and why emotional control is often more powerful than constant communication. You will also learn the difference between confident silence and the silent treatment, because one can reflect self-respect, while the other can become a form of emotional punishment. We will explore why some women may notice your absence more strongly than your presence, why excessive availability can sometimes reduce the mystery around your attention, and why pulling away can completely backfire when it is used as a childish game. Most importantly, you will learn the part that many people miss. Real emotional control is not about making another person anxious. It is about reaching a point where you no longer need their reaction to feel valuable. You stop chasing. You stop over-explaining. You stop trying to force attention. You simply allow your behavior to speak and give the other person enough space to reveal their true level of interest. Stay until the end, because the final lesson may completely change the way you understand silence. The goal is not to make her chase you. The goal is to become so emotionally controlled that you no longer need anyone to chase you. Welcome to our channel, where we break down the hidden psychology behind human behavior, relationships, attraction, and emotional control. If you want to understand what people often reveal without saying a word, subscribe to the channel and stay with us, because this is where the quietest behaviors can reveal the loudest truths. Attention has a strange quality. When it is always there, people can stop noticing it. Not because they do not care, but because the mind becomes familiar with what happens repeatedly. A message arrives every morning. A reply comes within minutes. A conversation is always available. Compliments are given freely. Someone is always checking in, asking questions, showing interest, or trying to keep the connection alive. After enough time, this behavior can become part of the emotional background. It feels normal. It feels expected. And that is where the psychology of absence begins to become interesting. When a familiar pattern suddenly changes, the mind notices the difference. A woman who was used to receiving your attention may suddenly notice that the messages have stopped. Your replies are no longer immediate. You are not starting every conversation. You are not looking for another reason to keep talking. The important part is not simply that you are gone. It is that your behavior is different from what she became accustomed to. The brain naturally compares the present with the past. It looks for patterns. When the pattern changes, it looks for an explanation. Why did he become quiet? Did something change? Is he losing interest? Did I do something? Is he talking to someone else? Did I misunderstand how interested he was? These questions can create mental attention because uncertainty leaves an unfinished psychological loop. When there is a clear answer, the mind can move forward. When there is no clear answer, the mind may continue returning to the situation. Research into romantic uncertainty has found that uncertainty can sometimes increase how much people think about a romantic interest. But this is where the subject becomes much more complicated than the popular advice of simply disappearing. Silence itself does not create attraction. Absence is not a magic trick. A man can disappear for a week and become more interesting to one woman while becoming completely irrelevant to another. The difference often depends on the existing connection, her level of interest, the reason behind his withdrawal, and how she interprets his behavior. This is why the meaning behind silence matters more than silence itself. There is also a major difference between stepping back and giving someone the silent treatment. These two behaviors can look similar from the outside, but psychologically they can be completely different. Healthy silence comes from emotional control. You step back because you need space. You stop reacting to every emotional trigger. You stop explaining yourself again and again. You allow a conversation to breathe instead of forcing it. You give the other person an opportunity to approach you because you are no longer trying to carry the entire connection by yourself. There is no hidden punishment behind it. There is no secret plan to make her anxious. You are simply refusing to act from desperation. Unhealthy silence has a different purpose. It is designed to punish, intimidate, or create emotional distress. You deliberately ignore messages because you want her to feel rejected. You disappear because you want her to panic. You withdraw affection because you want to force a reaction. That is no longer emotional control. It is an attempt to control someone else's emotions. And that difference matters because prolonged silent treatment has been associated with emotional distress and poorer relationship outcomes. The darker side of silence is not powerful because it makes someone chase. It is dark because being deliberately excluded can affect a person's sense of connection, security, and self-worth. So if the goal is genuine confidence, silence should never become a weapon, it should become a boundary. There is another reason sudden changes in attention can feel powerful. People often notice changes in patterns more strongly than patterns that remain stable. Think about what happens when someone always responds quickly. Eventually, a quick response becomes expected, but when that person suddenly takes much longer to respond, the delay can become noticeable. The same thing happens with affection, compliments, initiation, and availability. When attention is constant, it can become predictable. When attention changes, the change itself becomes information. A woman may not consciously sit down and analyze every detail, but she may still notice that the emotional rhythm is different. The person who was always available is suddenly less available. The person who always initiated is suddenly waiting. The person who always tried to keep the conversation alive is no longer doing all the work. That change can create a question, and sometimes the question becomes more mentally engaging than another compliment ever could. But this is where emotional control becomes more important than silence itself. Some men believe the goal is to make a woman notice that they are ignoring her. They check whether she viewed their story. They monitor whether she sent another message. They look for signs that she is becoming curious. They become obsessed with whether their absence is working. On the surface, they appear silent. Internally, they are still chasing. They have simply changed the form of the chase. Instead of chasing her directly, they are chasing her reaction. That is not emotional freedom. If your mood depends on whether she notices your absence, then her attention still controls you. Real emotional control begins when you stop needing a specific response. You do not become quiet because you want her to suffer. You become quiet because you refuse to keep investing where the effort is not being returned. You stop sending unnecessary messages. You stop explaining yourself to someone who is not listening. You stop trying to revive conversations that only survive because you keep pushing them forward. You stop reacting instantly just because you are afraid that silence might make someone leave. And this leads to one of the most misunderstood parts of the psychology of silence: uncertainty. When people do not know what another person is thinking, they may spend more mental energy trying to understand the situation. That can sometimes increase attention. A person may replay conversations. They may search for clues. They may reconsider previous interactions. They may wonder whether their own behavior contributed to the change. But uncertainty is not the same as attraction. This distinction is extremely important. If a woman already has emotional interest, a sudden change in your availability may make her more aware of your absence. If she has little or no interest, your disappearance may simply confirm that the connection was not important to her. And if your behavior becomes too cold or confusing, uncertainty can stop being intriguing and start feeling like rejection. That is why the strategy cannot simply be, disappear and she will want you. That is an oversimplified idea. The more accurate principle is that your behavior creates information. When you stop giving unlimited attention, you communicate that your attention has limits. When you stop chasing, you create space for the other person to show whether they are willing to move toward you. When you stop forcing a connection, you can finally see what the connection looks like without your constant effort holding it together. And that is where silence becomes psychologically interesting. It is not about making her desperate. It is about removing your own desperation from the equation. Because once you stop trying to control the outcome, you begin to see the truth more clearly. And sometimes, the truth is revealed not by what she does when you speak, but by what she does when you finally become quiet. Silence can feel powerful, but there is a point where it stops creating curiosity and starts creating distance. This is where many people make the biggest mistake. They learn that absence can attract attention, so they assume more absence must create even more attraction. But human psychology does not work like a simple formula. Ignoring a woman can backfire badly when the situation does not support it. If she already understands that you are playing a game, Your silence may not create mystery at all. It may simply create distrust. She may recognize that you are trying to trigger a reaction, and once the intention becomes obvious, the psychological effect changes. What looked like confidence can start looking immature. What looked like emotional control can start looking like manipulation. There is also another possibility that many men do not want to accept. She may simply be uninterested. If there is no emotional investment on her side, disappearing will not magically create one. You cannot manufacture genuine attraction through silence. You cannot create deep feelings by removing attention from someone who never wanted that attention in the first place. In some cases, your absence may actually make her decision easier. She may think you have lost interest, accept the situation, and continue with her life. And while that may feel like failure, it is actually useful information. You have discovered where you stand without spending weeks or months trying to force an answer. The same thing happens when silence is used after disrespect or emotional confusion. If you suddenly disappear after creating a strong emotional connection, the other person may not become curious. She may become confused, hurt, or defensive. If the relationship has an unresolved problem that requires communication, silence can make the problem larger. There are moments when stepping back is wise, but there are also moments when an honest conversation is the stronger move. A serious disagreement cannot always be solved by disappearing. A misunderstanding cannot always be fixed through delayed replies. Emotional maturity means knowing when silence creates space, and when communication is necessary. Research on withdrawal in romantic relationships has linked emotional disengagement with poorer relationship satisfaction and well-being, which is why silence should never be treated as a universal solution. The lesson is simple but powerful. Silence can reveal feelings, but it cannot manufacture genuine attraction. It can change a dynamic, but it cannot build a healthy relationship by itself. It can make someone notice your absence, but it cannot force someone to value your presence. Once you understand that, the entire meaning of silence begins to change. The strongest form of silence is not the kind that says, "I hope she misses me." It is the kind that says, "I am okay whether she misses me or not." That difference may sound small, but psychologically it changes everything. When your goal is to make her react, you are still emotionally dependent on her reaction. You are waiting for a message. You are checking whether she noticed. You are watching for signs that your strategy worked. Every little action becomes evidence. A view becomes exciting. A delayed response becomes frustrating. A new message becomes a victory. And suddenly, you are still controlled by her attention, even though you are pretending not to care. Real emotional independence looks different. You stop sending messages simply because you are afraid the connection might disappear. You stop explaining yourself repeatedly to someone who already understands what you mean. You stop chasing inconsistent attention. You stop reacting immediately to every emotional trigger. You allow people to come toward you voluntarily. You allow their effort, or lack of effort, to become visible. This is where silence stops being a manipulation tactic and becomes a boundary. A boundary does not say, "I will make you suffer because you did not give me what I wanted." A boundary says, "I will not continue participating in something that drains my peace." That is a completely different mindset. It does not require anger. It does not require revenge. It does not require a dramatic announcement. Sometimes the most powerful change is simply reducing the amount of energy you put into a connection that is no longer balanced. And when you do this naturally, the other person gets to experience your absence without being deliberately punished by it. That distinction matters. Forced ignoring has a certain emotional quality behind it. You suddenly become cold because you want her to become anxious. You take hours to respond even though you are holding your phone. You deliberately post things designed to make her jealous. You pretend to be busy when you are actually waiting for her reaction. These behaviors may create temporary tension, but they also reveal that you are still deeply focused on her response. Natural distance is different. You simply stop overinvesting. You match effort instead of constantly exceeding it. You do not force conversations that are dying naturally. You do not keep sending questions when the other person gives one-word answers. You do not carry the entire connection on your back. You let the relationship breathe. And sometimes, when you stop doing all the emotional work, you discover something important. You discover whether there was actually a relationship being built, or whether you were building most of it alone. This is one of the uncomfortable truths about attention. Constant effort can hide a lack of reciprocity. When you are always initiating, always checking in, always repairing, always keeping the conversation alive, you may believe the connection is stronger than it really is. But when you step back, the natural level of interest becomes easier to see. This does not mean every woman will react in the same way. There is no universal psychological response. One woman may become curious when your pattern changes. She may wonder why you are quieter. She may begin thinking about previous conversations. She may question whether your interest has changed. She may realize that she had become accustomed to your attention. She may even decide to reach out because she suddenly notices that the connection feels different without your constant effort. Another woman may do nothing. She may notice the change and simply move on. And this is the possibility that separates emotional control from manipulation. If your entire strategy depends on getting a specific reaction, you are not actually in control. You are gambling with your emotions. You are hoping she sends the message you want. You are hoping she becomes curious. You are hoping she feels your absence. But emotional independence means being prepared for every outcome. She may come closer. She may stay distant. She may ask what changed. She may never ask. She may realize your value. She may realize that the relationship was not right for her. You cannot control any of these outcomes. What you can control is whether you continue chasing someone who is not meeting you halfway. This is also where the darker side of silence needs to be understood. Silence can become psychologically powerful because exclusion can threaten basic human needs such as belonging, connection, and self-esteem. Being deliberately ignored can feel painful because humans are deeply social creatures. We are wired to notice when we are included and when we are pushed outside the circle. That is why silence can sometimes have more emotional weight than an argument. An argument at least gives you information. Silence can leave you searching for the reason. But this psychological power comes with responsibility. There is a clear line between silence as self-respect and silence as punishment. Silence as self-respect means you are regulating yourself. You are stepping away from unnecessary conflict. You are protecting your peace. You are giving both people room to think. Silence as punishment means you want the other person to feel rejected, anxious, guilty, or powerless. One comes from internal control. The other comes from the desire to control someone else. One creates emotional independence. The other creates emotional pressure. And once you understand this difference, the idea of the dark psychology of ignoring becomes much more interesting. The real darkness is not learning how to manipulate someone's emotions. It is understanding how easily human attention can become a source of power, and choosing not to abuse that power. The healthiest form of control is control over yourself. That brings us to another principle that quietly determines almost every relationship: reciprocity. People naturally pay attention to whether effort is being returned. If she communicates, you communicate. If she makes an effort to see you, you make an effort too. If she remembers details about your life, you show interest in hers. If she repeatedly disappears and expects you to keep everything alive, you stop carrying the entire connection alone. This is not about becoming cold, it is about becoming accurate. You respond to reality instead of fantasy. You respond to what someone actually does instead of what you hope they will eventually do. That distinction can save you from months of emotional confusion, because sometimes a man is not really in love with the relationship he has. He is attached to the relationship he believes could exist. He keeps investing because he is waiting for the other person to become more interested, more consistent, or more available. And every time she gives him a small amount of attention, he treats it as proof that the future he wants is still possible. But healthy emotional control requires looking at the complete pattern. Not one message, not one compliment, not one late-night conversation. The pattern. Who initiates, who makes effort, who communicates, who disappears, who repairs problems, who keeps returning, who only responds when it is convenient. When you start looking at patterns instead of isolated moments, silence becomes less about creating attraction and more about revealing reality. And that is when the power of silence begins to move away from manipulation and towards self-respect. In the end, the real power of silence was never about making a woman chase you. It was never about making her jealous, anxious, confused, or desperate for your attention. The deeper lesson is much more powerful than that. The art of silence is the art of controlling yourself when every part of you wants to react. It is knowing when to step back instead of chasing. It is knowing when to stop explaining yourself to someone who is not listening. It is knowing when your attention is being taken for granted and having enough self-respect to stop giving it away endlessly. Sometimes your absence will make someone realize your value. Sometimes it will make them wonder why you became different. And sometimes, the hardest truth is that your absence will not change anything at all. She may simply move on. But even that gives you something valuable. It gives you information. Because silence does not always bring someone closer. Sometimes it reveals how close they were willing to be in the first place. That is the real power of silence. You are not trying to control her reaction anymore. You are allowing her actions to speak for themselves. You are no longer measuring your worth by whether she sends a message, misses you, notices you, or comes back. You become comfortable with the possibility that she may stay, and equally comfortable with the possibility that she may leave. That is emotional control. And once you reach that point, you no longer need to use silence as a weapon. Your silence becomes a reflection of your standards, your boundaries, and your self-respect. So remember this the next time you feel the urge to chase someone who keeps pulling away. You do not always need another message. You do not always need another explanation. Sometimes you simply need to step back and let reality speak. Because when you stop forcing a connection, people reveal whether they actually want to maintain it. And when you stop needing the result, you finally become free from the result. If this video gave you a deeper understanding of silence, attraction, emotional control, and human psychology, make sure to like the video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And if you want more powerful psychological breakdowns about relationships, human behavior, emotional control, and the hidden forces behind everyday actions, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There is always more happening beneath the surface, and here, we uncover what most people never notice. Until the next video, remember, silence is not powerful because it makes someone chase you. Silence is powerful when you no longer need anyone to.